Welcome to this exclusive interview with a visionary entrepreneur and the driving force behind one of the most innovative and sustainable beverage companies of our time, Brian White. He is the esteemed founder of Yaupon Tea. Brian's unwavering passion for the environment and his quest to create a positive impact on both people and the planet has led him to craft a remarkable success story in the world of tea production. As the founder of Yaupon Tea, Brian has embarked on a journey that goes beyond simply creating a delicious and refreshing beverage. Armed with profound respect for uh, the tradition of Yaupon tea, he's turned it into a modern day phenomenon. Brian's vision is rooted not just in providing a wholesome and delightful tea experience, but also in empowering local communities and promoting environmental conservation. Throughout his career, Brian has demonstrated a remarkable ability to blend innovation with tradition, giving rise to a brand that not only captivates the taste buds, but also enriches the lives of those involved in its creation. From the humble beginnings of this venture, Brian has shown an unwavering dedication to ethical sourcing and ensuring that every sip of Yopon tea reflects a sustainable and ethical approach. In this insightful interview, we will delve into Brian's transformative journey, exploring the challenges that he faced, the pivotal moments that shaped his story, and the lessons that he learned while building Yopon Tea. So join us as we unravel this remarkable story of a true pioneer in the world of tea entrepreneurship, whose passion for tea leaves a lasting impression on both the environment and the lives that it touches. Well, Brian, thank you for being here. So tell me about how you got started with Yopon Tea.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Well, I am a plant nerd, self-proclaimed, and I've always been interested in plants, especially native plants. And um, I lived on a barrier island here in Central Florida in a place called New Smyrna Beach, and we had a hurricane or tropical storm blow through. I can't remember which. And when that happens, sometimes we get a lot of saltwater intrusion in the wooded areas, and it kills a lot of the vegetation. So that had happened, and a lot of the plants and trees were dead and brown. But this green stuff was like shooting out in all directions. And I was really curious about what plant that was so tough and resilient to survive all of this salt water. And I found out that it was Yaupon. And I went down a rabbit hole. I found a book called The Black Drink that was all about the thousands of years of indigenous use of this plant, and I was just fascinated by it. And I read that it is the only caffeine containing plant species native to America. And I was like, man, this stuff must taste like crap, or somebody would have done something with it already. You would be able to buy it, and you couldn't buy it. It was not commercially available anywhere in America. You could go out and find it in the woods and find a video on YouTube and make it yourself. But I just thought there must be a reason why, and the reason probably was that it didn't taste good or something, or maybe it made people sick. But I did find some videos on YouTube, and I made the tea, and I forced it on everyone I know, and everybody liked it. So I was like, man, this stuff is good, and everybody likes it. And I thought, well, I'm instantly going to get rich off of this. And of course, that's not what happened. It took a very long time for me to still not be rich. But what did happen is Yaupon has gone from near complete obscurity and is now quite popular. And in 2023, this year, Yaupon was the number one food trend to emerge out of Whole Foods. So, in a few short years, actually a little more than a decade, it went from totally unknown to one of the top food trends in America.
And that's really interesting. So tell me a little bit about how you developed Yopon into the product it is today.
Well, it took a lot of trial and error. Like there wasn't any methodology to lean back on, or anybody that we could ask for advice, because nobody had any advice to give. There was no experience, there was no industry in place. So we just had to learn kinesthetically by doing it, which is a lot of what entrepreneurship is anyway. So, we did a lot of trial and error, and found a way that works for us. We still do it that way today. But that's sort of the answer. It's just a lot of making mistakes and wins and losses and sorting them out and going with what worked for us.
So when you were getting everything started, were you able to like go out and find it somewhere, or like how did you start building your supply pipeline to produce all
Yeah,
of this?
it's a fun story. So I wrote my brother in about this time. He was still like just fresh out of high school. He was really young, but I just needed help. And so we would go out in the woods and we would harvest the leaves, and we would take them up to a tea processing facility up in Pickens, South Carolina. So we would pick in the morning, drive to South Carolina. It was about 7-hour drive, and we would spend all night processing the leaves, and then the tea company would package them for us, and we would take back home the products that they had packaged and filled from the last time. So it was a real suck fest. I mean, we had to do this for like 6 months or so. We did it this way, maybe once or twice a month, going up there. And then Kyle and I, my brother and I, won a pitch competition at the University of Central Florida. We both went to school, and we got first place in this venture competition. We won $12,000, and I called the guy up at the tea company and I said, "Hey, how much could we buy all that your equipment for?" And he said, "How about 11 grand?" So we spent 11 of the 12,000 on the equipment, spent the remaining $1,000 on a moving truck, and drove it up there and got our own space, and the rest is history. We've been manufacturing in-house ever since. So that was back in maybe 2016, 2015 that we made that
Now,
change.
we've had a couple of previous conversations, and one of the things that I found really interesting that I'd like you to touch back on is, you were talking about doing different experiments, but tell me a little bit about like the process you did to be able to get like the sweetness in the leaves that
Yeah.
not a lot of the other ones have.
Yeah, so we use what we call a low and slow process, kind of like barbecue. It's not a really great analogy, but sort of the same rule applies, where a lot of other tea companies and even Yaupon companies will take the leaves and wash them and put them in a dryer, and they dry out in maybe a couple of hours, and they're done. We don't do that, so we put them on what's called a withering trough, and we dry them out using basically ambient air, which is low humidity, but otherwise not very hot. And it takes us anywhere from 4 to 5 days to dry the leaves out. And then we do heat them up as like a last step to just get the last bit of moisture out of them. But we bring them only to about 180 degrees for a very short period of time. And that sort of bakes out the last bit of moisture. And then they're ground up, they're milled to a uniform particle size. And then most of our products go into tea bags. But that it makes a difference. You take a leaf and you sort of shock its system and heat it up real fast, and all the moisture comes out. Something different happens with the oxidation and the metabolism of that plant, and it just creates a different taste and aroma. And I'm not saying that it's any better or any worse. It's definitely different. And our customers seem to really prefer our method. Our Yaupon is the highest rated in many platforms. So if you go to Amazon, we're almost a 5-star rating, and there's almost 1,000 reviews. And anyone who sells you or tells you about selling on Amazon, in order to get 1,000 reviews, you basically have to sell 12,000 units of product. So that's a lot of people who are tasting and rating our product that seem to prefer it over other options.
Awesome. So now we know how you process it all, but like, so you talked about you and your brother going out and collecting leaves personally, but I'm sure where you're at right now, like that's no longer the case.
No,
So tell me a little bit about how you grew the production side of everything.
yeah, so we started off really small, just harvesting in the wild off land that either was just derelict or we knew the owners in a lot of cases. Then maybe back in 2017, my mom and I found a piece of property that had a lot of Yaupon on it that was being sold at a tax auction. And it was being sold very cheaply because it was land that nobody wanted. It was like kind of out in the middle of nowhere and there was no access to it. And but it was a 13-acre parcel of land. So it was this big piece of land and we ended up buying it for super cheap. And we had it certified organic. And that's where we sourced a lot of our Yaupon. About a year after that, I got another 70 acres under that was owned by a municipality here in Florida, and we got a contract for managing that land. That was also certified organic. And since that time, we have obtained about 71,000 acres under some form of management contract across 3 states. So that's just wild Yaupon, but we also propagate our own cultivars of Yaupon trees that are specifically for food production. So we've shifted heavily into agriculture in the last few years. We work directly with farmers. So we provide them with the trees, they grow them out for us, and then we buy back all of the output. That is still something that is maturing. We're only about 2 years into that. It takes about 2 years just for the trees to mature. So we're almost to the point now where we're going to start harvesting our first crops. Actually, I'm supposed to harvest our first crop in the next couple of weeks here in Florida from an organic farm in the Panhandle. But just in the last year and a half, we've planted over 150,000 trees in both Florida and Mississippi. So they're getting around. And I mean, I do think the future of this business is an agricultural future. I don't really envision it as being a managed forestry product for its entire life cycle. I do think that there will always be wild Yaupon on the market. But I don't think that's what the vast majority of it will be in the future. Yeah.
Okay. So you're partnering with a lot of farmers now. Tell me a little bit about like when you first started partnering with farmers, how were you able to get in contact with them? And then what do you feel like has been the best method for you to build those partnerships and relationships with other farmers?
Yeah, I mean, I find like the farming community and industry is very insular. They get ripped off a lot. They're at the bottom of an inverted food pyramid. That means, our food system in America is kind of screwed up, and farmers are doing all of the work, and they're shouldering all of the risk, and they are making the least amount of money out of everyone. So I don't think that that's very fair. So what we set out to do in the very beginning was to target farmers that have been historically disadvantaged and marginalized. And the idea was we could give them something they could grow at a high value per acre value, and they would know what the price is up front. So that's how we got a lot of farmers to sign up is we guarantee the pricing up front. They sign a contract with us, they know what the price is going to be. The only thing they have to worry about is the yield, is how much they're going to produce. It did help that I know a thing or two about plants and ecology. So I'm not just like, a finance startup guy that is going to go in there and sell them some stuff. There is a degree of trust, I think, that comes from having a working knowledge of what you're doing. That's very useful, right? And another thing is we developed a partnership early on with the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Science, which is the land grant institution here in Florida. So they work with all the farmers, anybody who grows anything, all the horticulturists. And then I got a partner named Ty Strode, who is a huge commercial propagator. So he propagates all of our trees. So he was making contacts and connections with us. The Institute of Food and Agricultural Science, they wrote an article about us early on that gave us a lot of credibility. We had a good deal of adoption after that point. And now, a couple of years into it, I feel like we're pretty comfortable talking to farmers and speaking their language and getting trust from them, to where they feel like they're willing to take a risk on it. And another thing too is we don't pursue like crazy unsustainable growth at all costs. We don't want a farmer to come in and invest a huge amount of money in something that we're not sure is actually going to be successful. And this is still an experiment. So usually they come in saying, hey, let's do 10 acres and let's plant, 20,000 trees. And we will often push back on that and say, why don't you start with 2 acres or 1 acre and plant 2 to 5,000 trees? And that way, if you find out this doesn't work for you, you haven't wasted a lot of money and there's no hard feelings. And I think that sits well with people, like knowing that we actually want to have a long-term relationship with you. Whereas you trust us and we trust you, and you feel like we're working in your best interest, and we feel like you're working in our best interest. And those are the kind of relationships that endure over time. So
Awesome.
that's really how we've gotten away with that.
So now you do a lot of that relation building kind of some most of the time in person, kind of one-on-one. And does that help with like the communication as you go forward? So like if they are running into issues on that first 2 acres that they start, um, how much do you guys get involved with the communication between?
Oh, a lot. I mean, so our actual agreement that they sign actually states that we act as a consultant for them throughout the entire process. And they don't pay for that. That's just part of the deal. So when a farmer signs on with us, they get our help and assistance in our ear and our feedback all the time, whenever they need it. So it's certainly part of the deal, and we want them to know that we're invested in their success. If they fail, we fail. So, we want to make sure that they have all the tools and training that they need to succeed.
Awesome. So do you find with developing that relationship, not only are you sharing the information you know, but do they come back to you with things that they're learning as they're
Mhm.
going through to help other farmers, really?
Yeah, I mean, any information they want to share with us is pretty open source for everyone else. If they don't want to share it and they want to be proprietary, it's their property and they're allowed to do that. Um, we have some protections on our end too. So like we don't allow farmers to propagate their own trees. So you would actually be prohibited from taking a cutting from one of our trees on a farm and making another tree from that. We have a real big barrier to that. So we don't want our trees going to people and places where we're not there and we don't know what's going on. So that's one protective measure that we have in place. But yeah, I mean, if they want to share information and they're okay with it, yeah, absolutely, we'll do that. And if they don't want to, that's totally fine too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what do you think has been probably the hardest part of this whole process for you in getting everything up and started?
Oh boy. I mean, running a business, especially these days, is just hard. There's no way around it. Everything is hard. And when you get started, you have to wear all the hats. So, like, developing the trees and making the products and stuff, for me, that was the easy part. The hard part has been, you know, maintaining your relationship with people. Managing people is very hard. Having a large team that needs leadership is really tough. It can be very thankless and lonely at times. Raising money is extremely difficult, especially right now, and it's also extremely necessary. So, it's like being trapped in a situation where you have to be there and you don't want to be there and you're not good at it and it's hard is is not a fun place to be. So that's been really difficult. I've had a lot of partnerships go badly over time, which I have used to feel really negatively about myself, like it was a personal failure. Nowadays, I just feel like that's just part of the deal. I mean, if you're in business long enough, that will happen to you. You can't control what other people do. You can only control how you react to it. So, for me, I've had to develop really strong organizational skills that I did not have before. I've had to try to work on my emotional intelligence, which I did not have to do before. And these are things that are really necessary skill sets for an entrepreneur. You have to be tenacious. You have to understand timing. You have to wear all the hats, and you can't blame someone else for things that go wrong. When you're in charge of an organization, it all comes down to you. That's where the buck stops. So the old trope that that's where the buck stops, but it is. And all of that stuff is really tough. So the interesting thing there is I think most entrepreneurs get into it because they have a specialized skill set that they want to share with the world or build something out of. And for me, it was about tea and food and plants and ecology and all of that. That's the easy stuff, right? Because we understand that. I understand it. It's what I love. But managing a large organization, raising capital, maintaining a strong discipline in your business and around your financials and running your P&L and staying alive, those are things that every entrepreneur has to learn how to do, and that's the hard stuff, so I think a lot of people don't plan for that. I certainly didn't. I just am very tenacious to what I mean is too dumb to quit, so I just had to adapt in order to survive. I don't know if it's a personality positive trait or a flaw, but I think most of us that are still here after many years, you will find that trait is an adaptive quality that is really resilient and just sort of like one of those clowns that you punch and it falls and then comes
Yeah.
back up. Yeah, one of those. So that's
I,
who.
I do I do agree with you. I think having that tenacity to come back to stay with it even during the hard parts is really important to getting to the success. I hear people say all the time, there's thousands of people who stop, just before they hit the turning point when things go well. So, but eventually things do go well. So, what has been like the most rewarding part about this whole endeavor for you?
Oh, I mean, so much of it is rewarding, and that's really what keeps you going. Is I have had failings with personnel, with staff. Being an HR person is maybe not my strong suit, but I've learned a lot from it. And the team that I have now, they're super committed, dedicated, hardworking. So they stick with me, even when they don't have to. And so that is a culture that we have built here that I'm really proud of. That they care about the mission, they care about the products, they care about our customers, they care about the long goals that we have, the very audacious goals that we have. That's a huge win
So
for
that
me.
actually brings me to kind of like the last question that I had for you. And this looks like a good time to ask it, but where would you like to see things go in the future? Kind of what are your hopes for everything?
Yeah, I mean, I have a very strong scale orientation. So like my goal for Yaupon has always been that it is a new industry in America. It's about something way larger than Yaupon Brothers. It's about this plant that should be consumed by 150 million Americans every day and more people outside of America. And it's not right now, but there's so many things that are symbolic about Yaupon that I think are really important for us to understand. And one is that the reason why people don't know about it today is simply because it's a consequence of the erasure of indigenous culture, period. That's the reason. We killed or kicked out most of the indigenous people in this country. And as a result, we lost this amazing thing that we had, you know? So bringing that back feels really important to me. And then also it makes so much sense to grow this plant on a commercial scale because every farmer that is choosing to grow Yaupon is choosing not to grow something else. And the things that they're usually choosing not to grow are things that are not good for our society and not good for our planet. So, it really has the power to change millions of lives, to develop a lot of economic opportunity in parts of America that desperately need it, and to fix some really crazy social issues that are unique to this country, like the economic disparity, the food inequality, all of those things. I think Yaupon could put a dent in, but it's got to take off and people have got to adopt it in order for that to happen. So definitely sort of like a life mission for me to make those things go. And I think they will.
Awesome. Well, I also hope that those things happen because this is something that I also feel very strongly about like returning to growing locally and things that
Mhm.
have traditionally flourished in the area that you are in, and bringing more of that back. So thank you so much for all of your time, and sharing all of your knowledge and your whole journey. Um,
You're
and
welcome.
I look
Thank you.
forward to seeing where everything goes. And I very much like the tea. I went out and got some. So
Oh,
thank you for
thanks.
developing it.
I would have sent it to you for free.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, thanks, Maggie, for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye bye.